When a desperate single dad sells his prized car to save his daughter's life, he never expects the mysterious billionaire who buys it to return with the keys, the car, and a note that says, "This was never yours to lose." Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The low rumble of the engine echoed through the quiet streets of Maple Ridge as Daniel Reed guided his '68 Mustang down the stretch of road that curved along the river. The morning sky was a soft watercolor, blue bleeding into gold, casting long shadows across the frosted pavement. He didn't usually take this route to work, but today wasn't about routine. Today was about goodbye. The Mustang had been with him longer than most things in his life. He still remembered the first time he saw it, rusted, half-covered in a tarp, sitting in his uncle's barn like a forgotten relic. He and Lauren had spent weekends restoring it, laughing over scraped knuckles and greasy pizza, listening to classic rock and mapping out a life that never quite unfolded the way they'd planned. It had been their project, their escape, their future on four wheels. And now it was the last piece of her he hadn't let go. Daniel shifted gears, the familiar pull of the engine steady beneath his hands. The leather seat creaked as he leaned back, trying to take in every detail, the hum under the hood, the scent of old vinyl, the way the steering wheel still fit perfectly in his grip. He passed the old diner where he and Lauren had taken Lily for chocolate chip pancakes on Sunday mornings. Past the elementary school where Lily had first learned to write her name. Past the auto shop that barely kept its lights on these days, thanks to bills that stacked faster than the cars he could fix. His jaw clenched. It wasn't just a car, it was history. It was the echo of Lauren's laugh over the roar of the open road, her hair wild in the wind, hand on his knee. It was the long drive home after Lily's surgery 3 years ago, her tiny form asleep in the back seat, stuffed bear clutched to her chest. The car had held their joy, their heartbreak, their hope. But Lily needed more than stories now. She needed another chance. Daniel turned into the gravel lot beside the old general store and cut the engine. The silence was immediate and unforgiving. He sat still, hands on the wheel, not ready to let go. Then slowly he exhaled. It was time. He stepped out of the car. The door clicked shut behind him with finality. The Mustang gleamed in the morning light, as if it knew it was saying goodbye, too. The call came just after noon. Daniel Reed was beneath a lifted pickup, socket wrench in hand, trying to loosen a bolt that refused to budge. His phone buzzed once, then again. He ignored it at first. Customers didn't usually call during work hours, and his focus was razor-thin these days. But when it rang a third time, and he saw the school's name flash across the screen, something inside him went cold. "Mr. Reed, it's the nurse at Maple Ridge Elementary," came the voice, too calm for how fast his heart was starting to race. "Lily collapsed during recess. We've called an ambulance. They're taking her to St. Agnes." He didn't remember tossing the wrench or how fast he ran for his truck. The only thing he could recall was how the sky looked, gray and low like it was pressing down on the world, and the way his chest refused to loosen, no matter how deep he breathed. By the time Daniel reached the emergency room, Lily was already behind a curtain, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily and monitors he couldn't understand. A nurse gently led him to a chair beside the bed. His daughter, his bright, curious, story-spinning Lily, was pale and still, a faint crease between her brows like even unconscious she was trying to figure things out. The doctor came in not long after, kind eyes, tired hands, words delivered gently, but they hit like hailstones. "There's a congenital heart defect," the doctor said. "It's one we often catch earlier, but sometimes the signs are subtle. She's going to need surgery." Daniel blinked. "Surgery? But we've never had any problems. She runs, she plays." "I know, but the valve's weakening. The sooner we intervene, the better the outcome." He heard numbers next, figures that sounded more like the cost of a house than a procedure. And no, they didn't take payment plans for surgeries of this scale. not for out-of-network patients with no insurance. Daniel nodded, said he understood, though he didn't. Not really. When the doctor left, he reached for Lily's hand. It was warm, too small, too fragile. She stirred, eyelids fluttering. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered, trying to keep the tremble from his voice. "Daddy," she mumbled, eyes still closed. "I'm tired." "I know," he said softly. "You just rest, baby. I've got you." And in that moment he knew, no matter what it took, no matter what he had to sell or beg or break, he'd find a way. Daniel sat at the kitchen table long after Lily had fallen asleep, her soft breathing drifting down the hallway like the fading echo of a lullaby. The clock ticked too loudly in the silence, each second cutting deeper than the last. He stared at the stack of paperwork in front of him, hospital intake forms, surgical estimates, medication schedules. None of it looked real, just numbers and ink, cold and merciless. The estimate for the surgery sat on top, the total circled in red ink like a cruel joke. $78,000. Even if he worked double shifts every day for the next 5 years, he wouldn't come close. The shop barely paid the bills. His savings were gone, drained over the past year, with Lily's tests, rent, food, and gas, though there was no family to call, no backup plan, just him and her. He rubbed his temples, willing the pressure behind his eyes to go away. The weight of it all, the fear, the helplessness, the guilt, pressed down like a vice. For a second he thought about walking away, just taking Lily and disappearing into some quiet town, hoping for a miracle. But he knew better. Hope didn't come cheap, not in this world. His eyes drifted to the old photograph pinned to the fridge, a younger version of himself and Lauren, leaning against the Mustang, her hands greasy from the engine, her smile wide and unbothered. That car had been their shared dream, the thing they'd built together when the world still felt full of possibility. He didn't want to lose it. But then he thought of Lily, her tiny fingers gripping his when she was scared, the way she always asked if Mommy could see her from the sky. How brave she had been, even when her lips turned blue on the hospital bed. Daniel stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the garage. The Mustang sat beneath the flickering motion light, polished and proud, like it was waiting for one last ride. He hadn't even told Lily he was thinking about selling it. Part of him didn't want to admit it to himself. But he knew. He would post the listing tomorrow, because the car had once saved him. But now it was Lily who needed saving. And some things you just couldn't put a price on. Daniel stared at the blinking cursor on the listing site, his fingers hovering motionless above the keyboard. The garage smelled faintly of oil and dust, the scent of years gone by. The Mustang gleamed beneath the overhead light, its deep green paint flawless, chrome polished to a mirror shine. Every inch of it spoke of care, of history, of love. But none of that mattered now, not in the way that Lily's heartbeat did. He took a breath, steadying the lump in his throat, and began to type. For sale, 1968 Ford Mustang Fastback, mint condition, fully restored, one of a kind. He paused. That part was easy. Anyone looking for a muscle car would know the value the second they saw the pictures he uploaded, close-ups of the custom engine, the restored interior, the spotless undercarriage. But it was the next part he struggled with, the part he had to write as a father, not a seller. I'm not just selling a car. I'm selling the thing I've held on to the longest because my daughter needs a surgery I can't afford. She's 7. Her name is Lily, and she's my whole world. This Mustang was built by my late wife and me. It's priceless to me. But she would want me to do this. She would want me to choose our daughter's life over anything else. So that's what I'm doing. Daniel stared at the words, his chest tightening. It felt wrong putting his pain out there for strangers to read, like he was begging. But this wasn't pride anymore. This was about survival. He hit publish. Within minutes, the post was gaining traction. Comments flooded in, some offering prayers, others asking for more photos. A few people tried to lowball him, as always, but one message stood out. It came from a private buyer with no profile picture, no public information, just a simple offer. Asking price accepted. No negotiations. Will wire payment and arrange transport immediately. Daniel blinked. It was more than he expected. Too smooth, too fast. He read the message again, his fingers trembling. Then he looked at the Mustang. "Guess this is goodbye, old girl," he whispered. But even as he said it, something in his gut twisted. He had sold the car to save Lily, but somehow it felt like he was losing part of her mother all over again. The email came less than an hour after Daniel listed the car. No questions, no haggling, no delays. Subject: Mustang purchase. Full offer accepted. Payment will be wired today. Transport has already been arranged. Please confirm your address and availability for pickup within 24 hours. No name, just a generic email handle and a signature that read simply AV. Daniel reread it 3 times, half convinced it was a scam. But before he could second-guess it any further, his phone buzzed. A notification from his bank. The money had landed. $78,000. In full, clean, no note, no follow-up, just done. He stared at the screen, heart hammering against his ribs. Relief and confusion tangled together in his chest like threads in a knot. He should have been celebrating. Lily's surgery could be scheduled now. No more waiting, no more fear. But instead of joy, there was only a heavy quiet. The next morning, a matte black transport truck rolled up to the shop. It came early, before the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the gravel lot. The driver stepped out without a word, clipboard in hand, mid-50s, ball cap pulled low, sunglasses hiding his eyes. "You read?" he asked. Daniel nodded, still trying to make sense of how fast everything was happening. The driver handed him the clipboard, indicating where to sign. No special instructions, just load and go. Daniel walked to the Mustang slowly, like each step brought him closer to something final. The car sat perfectly in the morning stillness, clean and composed, as if it understood its time here had run out. He ran a hand along the smooth fender, his throat tight. He remembered Lauren's laughter echoing through this very garage. Remembered Lily's tiny hands gripping the steering wheel, pretending she was going to race the moon. So many memories, all packed into the shell of a machine. He gave the driver a nod, and together they guided the Mustang onto the ramp. No words, no goodbyes. Within minutes, the truck pulled away, engine rumbling, as it disappeared down the long stretch of road. Daniel stood there long after it was gone, staring at the empty space where the car had been, wondering who would buy something so fast, so quietly. And more than that, why? The rumble of the transport truck faded into the distance, swallowed by the stillness of the early morning. Daniel stood in the cold, his hands jammed into the pockets of his worn work jacket, watching until the red taillights disappeared behind the line of bare trees at the end of the road. Then there was only silence, and the empty driveway staring back at him. The Mustang had never been just a car. It was memory, ritual, and grief wrapped in steel and chrome. Every oil change, every polish, every small repair had been a way to hold on to Lauren just a little longer. Losing it felt like saying goodbye to her all over again, but this time there was no time to mourn. Daniel turned and walked slowly back toward the house. Frost crunched beneath his boots, the morning air sharp against his face. He paused on the porch, hand on the railing, and looked out once more at the vacant patch of gravel where the car had always sat, its spot like a missing tooth in the smile of their little home. It was gone, but Lily was still here, and that made the ache worth it. Inside, the house was quiet. The heater rattled in the hallway, fighting off the cold that crept in through old window frames. Daniel moved through the kitchen like a ghost, filling the kettle, placing it on the stove, not really tasting the motions of the morning. His eyes drifted toward the fridge where Lily's drawings were pinned with magnets, purple stick figures, suns with smiling faces, a bright red car with 3 people inside. He traced his thumb over one of them absently. In the next room, he heard the creak of Lily's bedroom door. Small footsteps padded toward him. "Daddy?" Her voice was still thick with sleep. Daniel turned, forcing a smile. "Morning, sweetheart." She blinked up at him, rubbing her eyes. "Where's the Mustang?" He crouched beside her, pulling her into a hug. "We had to let it go." Lily leaned into him, her arms wrapping tight around his neck. "Will it come back?" Daniel closed his eyes. "No, baby. But it helped us get something even more important." She didn't ask what. Maybe she didn't need to. He held her a little longer, feeling the weight of everything he'd given up and everything he might still get to keep. The appointment desk at St. Agnes Medical Center smelled faintly of antiseptic and tired coffee. Daniel sat across from the receptionist, a clipboard on his knee, pen hovering just above the final signature. His hands trembled slightly, but not from nerves, more from everything that had led to this moment. It was done. The money from the Mustang sale had cleared. He'd wired the deposit yesterday and brought in the rest today. Savings scraped from an old emergency fund, a last-minute loan from a friend, and the final payment from the car buyer. Somehow, some way, it had all come together. Lily Reed, age 7, pediatric cardiac valve reconstruction. The receptionist read aloud softly, confirming the details. Daniel nodded. He couldn't speak yet. "We've scheduled her for Tuesday morning. Pre-op will begin at 6:30 a.m. You'll need to arrive by 6. Dr. Benson will meet with you both the evening before to go over final prep." She smiled gently, placing the paperwork in a neat folder and handing it to him. "She's in good hands, Mr. Reed." Daniel managed a small thank you, his voice quieter than usual. Outside the hospital, the winter sun had begun its slow slide toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Daniel leaned against his truck for a moment, folder tucked under his arm, and exhaled. A long, broken breath. He should have felt relieved. He should have felt victorious, but all he could feel was the weight of everything he'd had to trade in. That Mustang was more than metal. It was the last piece of Lauren he could touch. Selling it had been like cutting away the final tether to the life they'd once built together. And now, with Lily's surgery just days away, the fear was still there. The what-ifs. The shadows that followed every smile she gave him, every "I'm fine," she said, when he knew she wasn't. Back home, Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring with a quiet intensity. She looked up as he walked in. "Did you get the doctor stuff done?" she asked. He nodded and kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, we're all set." Lily smiled and held up her drawing. It was the two of them standing beneath a big, bright heart. Daniel stared at it for a long moment, the corners of his mouth lifting, even as his eyes stung. He didn't know what the next few days would bring, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was worth everything. The hospital room was dim and quiet, lit only by the soft amber glow of a wall sconce and the rhythmic pulse of the heart monitor beside the bed. The sounds, steady beeps, the hiss of oxygen, the occasional muffled announcement from the hallway, had faded into background noise, replaced by the rise and fall of Daniel's voice as he told another story, just for her. Lily lay curled beneath the thin hospital blanket, her eyelids heavy, fingers loosely wrapped around the edge of her stuffed giraffe. Tubes ran from her wrist, tape holding the IV secure, but her grip on that worn plush toy hadn't loosened once since they arrived. Daniel sat beside her, hunched slightly forward in the too small chair, elbows on his knees. His voice was low, warm, worn at the edges. "So they drove straight into the desert," he said, "you and me, in our old Mustang, chasing the biggest sunset the sky's ever seen. The whole road ahead was glowing orange, and we didn't have a map, just stars to follow." Lily's lips curled faintly. "Was I driving?" "You bet," he said, brushing her hair gently from her forehead. "Feet barely touched the pedals, but you had sunglasses on and a juice box in the cup holder. Coolest driver the desert's ever seen." She giggled sleepily, the sound soft and precious. Daniel swallowed hard and leaned closer. And after we outran the sun, we stopped on a hill to look at the stars. There were so many we couldn't even count them, but we tried. You made up names for them like Twinkie and Bob, and one that looked like a dancing giraffe. "Like Gerald?" she mumbled, clutching the stuffed animal tighter. "Exactly like Gerald." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Will we go there someday? For real?" Daniel nodded, blinking against the sting behind his eyes. "We will, kiddo. Soon as you're better. We'll drive somewhere where the sky doesn't end, where there's no hospital, no machines. Just you, me, and the open road." Lily's eyes fluttered closed, a smile still faint on her lips. As her breathing deepened and the heart monitor kept its steady rhythm, Daniel sat in silence, his hand in hers, his promise still hanging in the air like a whispered prayer. He didn't know how to fix everything, but he knew how to dream, and for her, that would always be enough. The world had finally gone still. It was just past midnight when Daniel stirred on the couch, his neck stiff from sleeping upright, a threadbare quilt draped over his shoulders. The television was still on, some late-night documentary playing at a low murmur, but he hadn't been watching it. Not really. He'd just been existing in that numb, exhausted space between relief and recovery. Lily was home. She was sleeping peacefully in her bed for the first time since the hospital, her chest rising and falling in that slow, steady rhythm that had become Daniel's new favorite sound. The surgery was over. She was going to be okay, but peace hadn't settled yet, not fully. Maybe it would take time, or maybe it was just that too much had been lost in the process. A sudden knock broke the silence, sharp, singular, unmistakable. Daniel blinked, sat upright. His heart thudded as he glanced at the clock. 12:03 a.m. He stood slowly, careful not to wake Lily, and moved toward the front door. The porch light was still burned out, casting the world outside in shadow. Another knock didn't come. He opened the door. The street was empty. No cars, no footsteps. Just cold night air pressing in around him. He stepped onto the porch, squinting into the dark. Then he saw it. Lying there on the worn welcome mat were a pair of familiar keys, black key fob, scratched silver tag with the initials DR, still etched faintly into the metal. His breath caught. Beside the keys was a folded piece of thick paper. No envelope. Just a single note. He crouched, picked them both up, his hands suddenly unsteady. Unfolding the paper, he read, "This was never yours to lose. No name, no contact. Just those 7 words." Daniel stood frozen, staring at the message, the keys cold in his palm. Slowly, he stepped off the porch, walked down to the driveway. There, parked perfectly where it used to sit, was the '68 Mustang, his Mustang. Not just returned, but restored. The paint shimmered like fresh rain. New tires, polished chrome, every dent, every scar, gone. For a long moment he just stood there, keys clutched tight, heart pounding. He didn't know who had done this, or why. But deep down, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone out there had been watching, and they believed he still deserved to dream. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The note sat on the kitchen table, unfolded and smoothed flat, like maybe if he stared at it long enough, the meaning would change. But it didn't. This was never yours to lose. 7 words, handwritten in dark ink, clean and deliberate. Not a signature, not even an initial, just that single line, cryptic, certain, and somehow personal. Outside the window, the Mustang gleamed under the street lamp, more beautiful than he'd ever seen it. The body had been repainted a deeper forest green, smooth as glass. The rims were upgraded, the interior reupholstered in soft leather that still had that faint new car scent. The engine, he'd checked, hummed like a dream. Someone hadn't just returned the car. They had restored it beyond what Daniel ever could have afforded, beyond what it had ever been, and they hadn't left a trace. He'd checked security cameras around the shop. Nothing. Asked his neighbor across the street. She hadn't seen a thing. It was like the car had simply materialized, along with the note and the keys, as if someone knew exactly when he would need it most and exactly what it meant to him. Daniel leaned back in the chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The part that kept echoing in his mind wasn't the car itself, it was the words, "Never yours to lose." Who would say that? Who could say that? Someone who knew the story, someone who'd read the listing, someone who understood what the Mustang meant to him, to Lauren, to Lily. His thoughts kept circling back to that mysterious buyer, the one who paid full price, no questions asked, and arranged for same-day pickup. No profile picture, just the email. AV. And now? This. He got up and stepped outside again, barefoot on the cold porch, keys in hand. The night air was sharp, but he didn't feel it. He just stared at the Mustang, his reflection caught in the polished surface. For the first time in weeks, he felt something stir in his chest. Not confusion, not anxiety, gratitude, and a flicker of awe. Whoever had done this hadn't just returned a car, they'd returned hope. Daniel didn't do subtle well, especially when his world had just been turned upside down. By morning, the Mustang sat exactly where it had been the day he sold it, its emerald sheen catching the first light like a dream reborn. But Daniel wasn't dreaming. He'd woken up 3 times in the night to check. Sure, he'd imagined the whole thing. Each time it was still there, real as the ache in his chest. Now, coffee in hand and nerves stretched tight, he sat at the shop's front desk, clicking through emails and transaction records, retracing every step of the sale. There had to be something. A name, an address, anything. But there wasn't. The buyer's email led nowhere. A burner. He tried messaging back. No response. He checked the payment transaction. Funds wired through a blind trust. No personal information. No linked institution that led to a human being. Just numbers and corporate shielding. The transport company that picked up the car had been contracted through a third-party broker. Daniel called them next, pacing the length of the shop with the phone pressed to his ear. The dispatcher on the line was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed, that job was booked anonymously. We don't have permission to share the client's details." "You don't understand," Daniel said, pushing back the panic rising in his throat. "This isn't about me chasing someone down. They returned the car, upgraded, restored. They left no name, just a note." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "People don't usually give things back, Mr. Reed." "Yeah," Daniel said softly. "I know." He hung up, staring out the garage's open bay door at the Mustang. The sun was hitting it just right, sparkling across the hood like it belonged in a showroom. Whoever had done this hadn't wanted to be found. That much was clear. But why? Why buy a car for $78,000 only to return it without a word? Why make it better? Why now? Daniel rubbed his jaw, frustration simmering under the surface. He didn't like mysteries. He didn't like debts he didn't understand. But this wasn't just mystery. It felt intentional, deliberate. Someone out there had seen him, had seen Lily, and they weren't finished, not yet. High above the noise and movement of the city, nestled in a penthouse wrapped in glass and silence, Alexandra Vale stared out at the skyline with a cup of untouched tea in her hand. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, painting the floor in gold, but she didn't move. She rarely did in moments like this. Stillness had become her rhythm, quiet her preferred company. The notification had come through a few days ago, a flagged alert from one of her private filters that scanned for automotive auctions across the country. She wasn't looking to buy, not really. Cars had been her father's thing, not hers. But she kept the alerts live anyway. Some habits didn't break even after death. The subject line had caught her eye first. 1968 Mustang Fastback, for sale by owner, urgent. But it was the listing that stopped her cold. A single dad, selling the car he and his late wife had restored, not to move, not for profit, but to pay for his daughter's heart surgery. Alexandra had read it twice. Then a third time. There was something raw about it, unfiltered, quiet, and heartbreakingly sincere. No GoFundMe link, no charity pitch, just a man with grease under his nails and desperation in his words. She could have clicked away. She had before. Instead, she sent the wire. No questions, no delay. The Mustang was picked up that same day and transported directly to her private auto restoration partner in Illinois. She gave them one instruction: return it better than it ever was, quietly. The tea had long gone cold in her hand. A knock came at the study door. "Miss Vale?" Her assistant, Nina, stood hesitantly in the doorway. "The Mustang has been delivered, as instructed." Alexandra nodded once, slowly. "Anything else?" Nina asked. Alexandra looked back out the window, her voice soft but firm. "Not yet." She hadn't expected the note to stir so much. She hadn't expected the ache in her chest when she read the line about the little girl with the red lunchbox and the father who gave up everything. Her own father had died when she was 14, and no one had done anything like that for her. But someone had done it for Lily. And that man, Daniel Reed, didn't even know she existed. Not yet. The Vale estate was a place where silence wore expensive shoes, wide marble halls, whispering doors, people who always seemed to know when not to look. Alexandra had grown up here, in this cold and polished kingdom of privilege, where affection was measured in performance and legacy was everything. She stood now in her father's old study, untouched since the day he died. The books still lined the walls, spines leather-bound and undisturbed. The desk, a hulking mahogany relic, sat in the same position it had always been, angled just enough so the city skyline was framed through the tall windows behind it. She ran a hand lightly along the edge. The surface was as smooth as she remembered, but colder now, just like everything else he left behind. Her father, Charles Vale, had been a legend in the auto industry, a man who could command boardrooms with a look and charm, stockholders with nothing more than a nod. But to Alexandra, he'd simply been Dad. Until he wasn't. The flashbacks came without invitation, creeping in like smoke under a door. She was 14. Her father was in the hospital, a massive coronary, they'd said. The doctors needed a signature to proceed with an experimental procedure, one that might give him a fighting chance. But the board, led by Charles's younger brother, delayed. They cited liability, shareholder risk, image. By the time the lawyers had finished talking, Charles Vale was gone. Alexandra remembered the numbness first, then the fury, then the quiet decision that would define the rest of her life. They don't get to decide anymore. I do. She had been 19 when she took control of Vale Holdings, 24 when she ousted every board member who had sat idle in that conference room, 30 by the time she'd turned the company into something leaner, sharper, and entirely hers. But money had never fixed what was broken, not really. So now, when her internal filters flagged Daniel Reed's listing, and she read his story, a father sacrificing the only piece of his wife he had left to save their child, something deep within her stirred. Not pity, not charity, recognition. Because once upon a time, someone had chosen money over a life she loved. This time she'd choose differently. Lily's laughter returned in fragments, quiet at first, like a song Daniel hadn't heard in a long time and wasn't sure he'd ever hear again. But day by day, it grew louder, steadier, filling the house in ways silence had hollowed out over the last few months. She was healing. The color had come back to her cheeks. Her steps, once slow and cautious, now bounced with the lightness he remembered. He caught her dancing in the hallway one morning in her fuzzy socks, arms flailing, breathless with joy. Daniel stood at the end of the hall, watching from the doorway, one hand on the frame, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. It wasn't just that she was getting better, it was that she'd come so close to not. Some nights he still woke up panicked, heart pounding, until he remembered she was here, alive, just down the hall. He would listen to her soft breathing through the baby monitor he still hadn't taken down, needing the proof, needing the reminder that the nightmare had passed. But not everything was at peace. The Mustang still sat in the driveway, untouched since it had returned. Daniel hadn't even taken it for a drive. Every time he looked at it, something inside him twisted. Gratitude, yes, but also unease. Questions unanswered. Who had sent it back? Why him? Why like this? The note was still tucked into the drawer beside his bed. This was never yours to lose. He'd read it a dozen times, maybe more, and while Lily's recovery gave him all the reason in the world to be happy, the mystery behind that act of kindness lingered like a shadow in the back of his mind. He tried to let it go, told himself it didn't matter. What mattered was that his daughter was okay, that the surgery had gone well, that the bills had been paid, that they'd made it through. But some part of him couldn't rest, because someone out there had seen his pain, known what the car meant, and answered it not with pity, but with something else entirely. Mercy, grace, maybe even something like love. And Daniel Reed wasn't the kind of man to leave a debt like that unanswered. It started with the envelope. Daniel found it tucked in the crack of the mailbox one chilly Saturday morning, right as the frost was beginning to melt off the lawn. No return address, no stamp, just his name, printed in careful black ink across the front. Inside, folded in thirds, was a check. 1 month's rent exactly, not a penny more or less. No note, no signature. He stared at it for a long time, standing there on the porch with the cold seeping through his socks, the envelope hanging loosely in one hand. He'd just caught up with the hospital payments. Things were tight, but he was managing. Still, this made things breathe easier, but it didn't stop there. The next morning, there was a knock on the door. When Daniel opened it, no one was there, just a brown paper bag on the welcome mat, filled with fresh groceries. Not just the basics either. Strawberries, whole grain bread, Lily's favorite brand of apple juice, even the exact mac and cheese with the bunny on the box she always asked for, the one Daniel rarely bought anymore because it cost more than the generic brand. He stepped onto the porch, looked left, then right. Nothing but wind and early sun. Then, the third thing. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep curled beside him on the couch, he noticed a box on the kitchen counter that hadn't been there before. At first he thought maybe he'd picked it up earlier and forgotten, but when he opened it, his breath caught. It was the doll. The doll. The one Lily had circled in the back of the holiday catalog months ago, the one with the stethoscope and the hospital scrubs, and the little heart monitor that actually beeped, the one she had pointed to and said, "If I get that, I'll name her Hope." He hadn't been able to buy it then. He'd promised her someday, and now here it was, waiting. No tag, no card, just quietly, impossibly, there. Daniel sat down at the table, the doll in his lap, and stared out the window at the Mustang in the driveway. Someone was watching, not from afar, not idly. Whoever it was, they knew, they saw them, and they were helping in ways Daniel couldn't explain or repay yet. The more the gifts arrived, the more Daniel's gratitude blurred into obsession. He didn't talk to Lily about it. She just thought the world had finally turned kinder. She called the doll Hope and carried it everywhere, even to bed. He smiled for her, nodded along when she asked if maybe Santa came early, and said things like, "Maybe he did, sweetheart," though his mind was already racing ahead, trying to solve the puzzle that kept him up every night. He needed to know who was behind it all, not because he didn't appreciate it, but because he couldn't stand not knowing. The Mustang, the note, the check, the groceries, the doll. Someone out there was investing in his family like they knew him, and he couldn't just accept it blindly. He had to look them in the eye and say thank you. He had to understand why, so he started with what he knew, the car sale. He pulled up the invoice from the pickup day and found the broker's name, Orion Specialty Transport, a private vehicle hauling company based in Chicago. He called, waited on hold, got transferred, got stonewalled. Sorry, Mr. Reed, we're contracted under strict confidentiality. Our clients pay for discretion. We can't disclose who booked the order. I'm not asking for an address, Daniel replied, voice tight. Just a name, a company, something. They returned the car, restored it, left it in my driveway with a note. I need to say thank you. The woman on the other end paused, not unkind but unmoved. I believe you, but I can't help. I'm sorry. He called again 2 days later, different rep. Same answer. He even drove to the transport office on his day off. It was a sleek, modern building with glass doors and an empty front desk. A receptionist smiled and politely repeated the same line he'd already heard. Your order was fulfilled through an anonymous, third-party account. We are not authorized to release further information. Wall after wall. Daniel walked out into the wind, the city around him indifferent to his search. He stared at the cars passing on the street and felt, for the first time in weeks, powerless again. Whoever this guardian angel was, they didn't want to be found. But that didn't mean he'd stop trying. The rain had come fast that morning, gray sheets sweeping over Maple Ridge like the sky had finally decided to let go. Daniel pulled into the small diner on the corner of Main and Fifth, windshield wipers squeaking in tired arcs. Lily was at school, her strength returning more each day, and for once Daniel had a few minutes to breathe. He didn't usually come here, too many memories. He and Lauren had spent Sunday mornings in that back booth, sharing greasy hash browns and letting Lily draw faces in the syrup with her spoon. But today, something tugged him toward the familiar. Maybe he just needed a place that still smelled like burnt coffee and fresh biscuits. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The place was quiet, the morning rush long gone. He ordered a black coffee and slid into a corner booth, pulling out his phone to check work messages he wasn't really reading. A few minutes later, the door chimed again. She walked in without fanfare. No designer heels, no entourage, just a wool coat, jeans, boots damp from the rain. Her dark hair was tied in a loose braid, and her green eyes scanned the room before landing on the only other person inside, him. Mind if I join you? She asked, gesturing to the seat across from his. Daniel looked up, surprised. She was striking, but not in the kind of way that screamed for attention. It was more in the way she held herself, quiet confidence, like she knew how to blend in when she needed to. There was something familiar about her, though he couldn't place it. Sure, he said, nodding. Place is empty anyway. She sat down, offering a warm smile. I hate eating alone. The waitress came by, and the woman ordered tea and a blueberry muffin. They made small talk at first, about the weather, about how quiet the town had gotten since the holidays. She asked if he was from Maple Ridge, and he told her he'd grown up 2 towns over. She told him her name was Alex. Short for Alexandra? He asked. Sort of, she said with a shrug, but everyone just calls me Alex. He didn't know he was sitting across from the woman who had returned his car, paid his rent, and made his daughter smile again, and she didn't tell him. Not yet. The coffee grew cold between them, forgotten, as the minutes slipped by. Daniel found it strangely easy to talk to Alex. There was something about her presence, steady, attentive, unhurried, that disarmed him. She didn't fill silences with idle chatter or interruptions. She just listened, like she meant to carry whatever he handed her. So, she said softly, stirring her tea, you mentioned you have a daughter? Yeah, Daniel replied, smiling faintly. Lily, 7 going on 17, smart as a whip, obsessed with space. Told me last week she's going to be the first astronaut to bring snacks to Mars. Alex laughed gently, eyes lighting up. That's a very specific mission. She's got big plans, he said, the warmth in his voice unmistakable. Had a bit of a health scare recently. Heart surgery. Scariest few weeks of my life. Her smile faded slightly, but her gaze didn't waver. She's okay now? She's getting there, stronger every day. He paused, looking down at his hands. We were lucky, real lucky. Alex sipped her tea, letting the weight of his words hang in the space between them. Sounds like she has a pretty incredible dad. Daniel shook his head. Nah, just a guy trying to keep up. I sold my car. My wife and I built it together before she passed to pay for the surgery. Thought it'd break me, honestly, but it saved her. That's the only thing that matters. Her hand tensed slightly on her mug. He didn't notice. I'm sorry, she said. About your wife. Thanks, he replied. It's been a few years, but some days still feel like day one. They sat quietly for a moment, the rain ticking softly against the diner windows. What about you? He asked finally, looking at her over the rim of his coffee cup. Family? Alex smiled, small and practiced. Not anymore. Something flickered behind her eyes, something that made Daniel instinctively pull back. He didn't push. Work keeps me busy, she added quickly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. And I move around a lot. He nodded. Sometimes being a stranger has its perks. She tilted her head. You don't seem like the kind of guy who stays a stranger for long. Daniel gave a modest smile. Maybe, but there's something to be said for quiet corners and blueberry muffins. Neither of them said what they were really thinking, not yet. But for two people with secrets stitched into the seams of their lives, the silence between them felt oddly safe. It was late afternoon when Daniel walked through the front door, shrugging off the chill that had settled into the February air. The scent of grilled cheese lingered faintly, and the soft hum of Lily's favorite cartoon drifted from the living room. It was the kind of quiet, normal moment he'd missed more than he'd realized. "Hey, Bug," he called out, stepping into the kitchen. Lily popped her head up from the small art table he'd set by the window, her cheeks smudged with faint streaks of purple marker. "Hi, Daddy. I made something." Daniel smiled and walked over. Another masterpiece? She held up the drawing proudly, gripping it with both hands. The paper was full of vibrant colors, crayon lines slightly wobbly but filled with intention. He recognized the familiar shape of the Mustang, green with oversized wheels, sitting in front of what appeared to be their house. But it was the two stick figures beside it that made his smile falter. One was unmistakably him, broad shoulders, messy hair, his name scribbled above in purple. The second was a woman, long dark hair, green eyes colored in with care, a blue coat, and a big smile. In her hand she held a heart. Above her, written in Lily's careful handwriting, "The nice lady from the diner." Daniel crouched next to her, studying the drawing. "When did you draw this?" "Just now," she said, beaming. "I saw her with you. She gave me a muffin and said I had pretty hair." His breath caught. He hadn't seen Alex speak to Lily. Not at the diner, not outside, not anywhere. But clearly, she had. "You remember what she looked like?" he asked gently. Lily nodded. "Uh-huh. She looked like a princess, not the glitter kind, the smart kind." Daniel stared at the drawing, a knot tightening in his chest. The hair, the coat, the eyes, all too precise for a quick encounter. Something clicked. He stood slowly, the drawing still in hand. He looked out the window where the Mustang sat, gleaming in the last of the sun. It couldn't be. But deep down, a part of him already knew. Alex wasn't just some stranger from the diner. She was the one who'd brought the car home. The next time Daniel saw her, the air between them felt different. It was late afternoon when he spotted her walking out of the bookstore across from the hardware shop, hair tied back, hands tucked into the pockets of a navy coat, head bowed slightly against the wind. She looked the same, calm, quiet. But to Daniel, everything about her had changed. He crossed the street without thinking, the drawing Lily had made still folded in the inside pocket of his jacket. His boots splashed through a shallow puddle as he stepped in front of her path. "Alex?" She looked up, surprised but not startled. "Daniel!" He stared at her, searching for something in her face. guilt, hesitation, a denial ready to fall from her lips, but she didn't flinch. "I know it was you," he said, voice steady. "The Mustang, the groceries, the doll, all of it." For a moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, she exhaled and gave a small nod. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the swirl of emotions catching up all at once. Relief, gratitude, confusion, something close to betrayal. "Why?" he asked. "Why go through all the trouble? Why not just say something?" She stepped closer, her voice low. "Because I didn't do it to be thanked, and I wasn't sure if I could explain it in a way that didn't sound strange." "Try me." Alexandra paused, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a card, a sleek, matte black business card with silver lettering, Alexandra Vale, Vale Holdings. Daniel's brow furrowed as recognition hit. "Vale? The auto company?" She nodded. "My father built it. I inherited it. I don't run it publicly, but I own it, quietly." He stared at her, struggling to connect the dots. "You're a billionaire." "Technically." He took a step back, the words hardening a little. "So what? Was I just a charity case to you?" Her expression didn't change, but her voice turned sharp with emotion. "No, you were a reminder." "Of what?" Alexandra met his eyes. "Of what it looks like when someone chooses love over everything else." Daniel didn't know what to say. Gratitude sat heavy in his chest, but so did suspicion. What did someone like her want from someone like him? And yet, part of him knew she hadn't come to take anything. She'd come to give. Still, the question lingered between them like smoke. What now? They ended up sitting on a park bench just down the street from the diner, the same one where they'd first shared coffee and a conversation wrapped in quiet lies. Now there were no distractions, just the wind threading through the bare trees, the distant sound of kids playing somewhere behind them, and the weight of everything unsaid. Daniel sat forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. Alexandra sat beside him, composed as ever, but her fingers fidgeted in her lap, twisting the edge of her glove. "I don't get it," he finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but beneath it ran a deep undercurrent of something raw. "People like you don't just drop out of the sky to rescue people like me. You don't pay off strangers' bills and return their cars like some kind of fairy tale." Alexandra didn't speak right away. She looked out across the park, eyes distant. "So why me?" he asked. "Why my daughter? Why my life?" She turned to him slowly, something vulnerable flickering behind the usual steel in her gaze. "Because," she said quietly, "I once needed a Michael." He looked at her, caught off guard. "When I was 14, she continued, "my father collapsed in his office. Massive heart attack. There was a procedure that could have saved him. Risky, expensive, but possible. The board hesitated. Investors worried about liability, and while they argued, he died." Daniel's breath caught. She hadn't told him this before, hadn't told anyone probably. "Everyone had the power to help," she said, her voice tightening. "But no one chose to, not when it mattered." I remember thinking, what if just one person had stood up? Someone without a stake. Someone who didn't care about the money, just the person. She looked back at him. "That's what you did. For Lily, you gave up the thing you loved most without hesitation. You chose your daughter. And when I read your story, it felt like someone had finally answered a question I've been asking for years." Daniel was quiet, the world narrowing to the space between them. "I didn't do it to fix your life," Alexandra said. "I did it because people like you deserve a world where someone says yes." He swallowed hard. "And now what? What happens next?" She gave a small, unsure smile. "That's up to you." The strange thing about healing, Daniel found, was how quiet it was. There were no fireworks, no dramatic turning points, just slow, steady moments that stitched themselves together when you weren't looking. Like how Lily started eating full meals again, how she didn't flinch during checkups, how she danced in the kitchen without getting winded, and somehow in the spaces left behind by worry, something unexpected began to grow. It started with simple things. A text from Alexandra, "Coffee, I promise not to rescue anything today." A short walk through town, a visit to the used bookstore where she picked out an old astronomy book for Lily, smiling like she knew the stars personally. He took her to his favorite burger spot, the one with sticky booths and paper napkins, and she didn't complain when the ketchup bottle got stuck. She even laughed. Daniel didn't ask for anything, and Alexandra never offered what couldn't be accepted without shifting the balance between them. She didn't bring up the car, or the gifts, or the company she kept hidden behind a quiet smile. And he didn't bring up the weight she carried behind her eyes. They existed in this strange, fragile rhythm, two people orbiting gently around the edge of something deeper, careful not to lean too far, too fast. Sometimes she came by the shop, saying she was just in the area, which they both knew was a lie. But Daniel would pour her a coffee, and they'd sit in the break room or on the curb out back, sipping from mismatched mugs and talking about nothing important. She asked about Lily often, always with real interest, not out of politeness, and Lily in turn asked if the nice lady with the star book could come by again. Daniel didn't know what to call what was happening between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something quieter, more like trust, learning how to breathe. There were no promises, no plans, just warmth in the cold. And for now, that was enough. The keys felt heavier than Daniel remembered. He stood beside the Mustang as the last of the afternoon sun melted across the hood, casting long shadows across the driveway. Alexandra stood beside him, hands in the pockets of her coat, watching him with a quiet smile. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked. Daniel smirked, twirling the keys around his finger. "First time I've had her out since she came home. She looks ready." He glanced at the car, then at her. "So do you." They climbed in, Daniel behind the wheel, Alexandra in the passenger seat. As the engine rumbled to life, deep and smooth, a wave of memory hit him, the scent of leather and polish, the soft whine of the starter, the faint creak of the gear shift in his hand. It was all the same, and somehow better. He glanced at Alexandra. "Pick a direction." She smiled. "Surprise me." They drove without a map, turning down winding back roads that curved through golden fields and bare trees, the late sunlight flickering through the branches like a moving painting. Daniel rolled the windows down halfway, letting the crisp air swirl inside, carrying the scent of pine and old earth. He reached for the radio, found a classic rock station, and the Mustang filled with the sounds of Tom Petty and Fleetwood Mac. Alexandra didn't ask for control, just listened, her hand resting on the window edge, hair loose now and catching the breeze. They talked, but not constantly. Sometimes the silence between songs felt more intimate than words. Daniel told her about the time he and Lauren had driven this same road the night before Lily was born, just to calm the nerves. How Lauren had sung to the baby in her belly with the windows down, promising her a world full of road trips and music. Alexandra shared a story, too, about the first car she ever drove, a beat-up convertible with a failing radio and a leaky roof. Her father had bought it for her secretly, against her mother's wishes. "It was the one thing that felt like it was just mine," she said, "even if it fell apart after 3 months." As the sun dipped lower, Daniel pulled off to a quiet overlook, the view stretching wide with open sky and fading light. He didn't say anything at first, neither did she. But something unspoken passed between them, a glance, a breath, a closeness that didn't need naming. For the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't feel like he was chasing peace. He was already in it. The tension crept in like a draft, quiet but impossible to ignore. It started over something small, a gesture. Alexandra had stopped by the garage with lunch. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches from a local cafe and a thermos of fresh coffee. Daniel had grease on his hands, a half-finished brake job waiting, and a short fuse he didn't know had been lit. "You didn't have to do this," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, more brusque than he meant to be. Alexandra set the bag down on the workbench. "I know I didn't have to. I wanted to." He glanced at the food, then at her. Right, because billionaires just pop by small-town shops to drop off sandwiches. Her smile faltered. "Daniel?" He turned back to the car. "Look, I appreciate it. I do. But I don't need anyone taking care of me." The silence stretched. "You think accepting something kind means you're weak?" she asked quietly. "I think I've spent years holding things together with duct tape and grit," he said, voice tight. "And suddenly, someone shows up with the money, the answers, the fairy tale ending, and I don't know how to exist in that. I don't know how to stand in that world without feeling like I'm just a charity case." She didn't reply right away. When she did, her voice was softer, but firm. "You're not." Daniel kept his eyes on the car, jaw clenched. "You think you've built your life with steel and sweat," she said. "But I've seen people with money build entire worlds out of paper. It doesn't hold when the wind changes. What you have, what you've done, is stronger than that." He looked at her then, really looked. No pity in her eyes, no judgment, just quiet strength, and maybe a little hurt that he hadn't trusted her enough to see it. She stepped closer. "This isn't about power, Daniel, or debt, or who owes who. This is about two people trying to figure out how to stand beside each other without flinching." He let out a breath, long, heavy. "I'm just not used to help." "You don't have to be," she said. "You just have to stop mistaking it for weakness." Daniel looked down, then back up at her. And for once he didn't argue. The rain had rolled in by mid-afternoon, soft and steady, the kind that whispered against the windows and made the tools in the garage feel colder in Daniel's hands. He stood beneath the open bay door, watching the water pool along the gravel edges, the Mustang parked safely inside, dry and gleaming, one of the only things around here that didn't look worn thin. Alexandra arrived with a quiet knock on the frame, her coat damp, boots trailing water. She held a folder in her hand, her expression cautious but hopeful. "Hey," she said. Daniel gave her a tired smile. "You bring more muffins?" She shook her head and stepped inside. "Something else." He set down his wrench and took the folder when she handed it to him. Inside were papers, permits, plans, sketches, his own garage, redrawn. A new sign, new lifts, clean modern design with old charm still intact, a fresh start. "What is this?" he asked, already knowing. "A proposal," she said. "I spoke with a few people I trust. Quiet, off the books, no cameras, no press. We could renovate the shop, expand it. You'd be in control, your name, your business, your way. I just want to help." Daniel's face hardened as he closed the folder. "Alex," he said, the words slow and heavy, "I can't take this." "Why not?" "Because this garage isn't just a building. It's what's left of my life. It's mine because I bled for it. I watched it fall apart when Lauren died, and I put it back together bolt by bolt. If someone else builds it for me, it's not mine anymore." Alexandra stepped forward, trying to read his eyes. "You think accepting help erases everything you've done? That it rewrites the story?" "No," he said, quieter now. "I think it shortens it." She stared at him, disappointment flickering behind her calm. "You're allowed to want more, Daniel. You're allowed to stop surviving and start building." "I am building," he said, gesturing around at the cracked concrete and rusted lifts, "slowly, the way I know how." He handed the folder back to her, not unkindly. "I appreciate it. I do, but I need to do this on my own." Alexandra nodded, folding the papers under her arm. She didn't argue. But as she turned to leave, her voice was quiet. Even strong men can get tired of carrying everything alone. Daniel stood in the doorway long after she left, watching the rain fall harder, and wondering if maybe she was right. The next time Alexandra came by, it wasn't for Daniel. It was for Lily. She arrived in the afternoon with a book under one arm, an illustrated guide to the solar system, and a small tin of lemon cookies tucked under the other. Lily met her at the door with a grin wide enough to swallow the sky. "Miss Alex!" she squealed, wrapping her arms around Alexandra's waist before Daniel could even say hello. Alexandra laughed softly, crouching to her level. "I brought snacks and stars." Lily practically pulled her inside, already chattering about the moon phases and her science project, and how Gerald the giraffe was now officially a Martian explorer. Daniel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them. He wanted to be annoyed, wanted to remind himself of the distance he'd asked for, but all he could do was listen. An hour passed, then two, the house filled with a soft rustle of pages, laughter, and Lily's excited explanations about constellations that didn't exist but probably should. Daniel wandered into the kitchen to clean up and found himself pausing in the hallway, listening. Lily's voice was quieter now, her usual brightness softened with a trace of something heavier. "Miss Alex, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Alexandra replied. There was a beat of silence. Then, "Do you think you could help Daddy smile again?" Alexandra didn't answer right away. Daniel leaned forward slightly, heart caught in his throat. "He used to smile all the time," Lily continued, "when Mommy was here, when we worked on the car together, but now it's like he smiles with his mouth, but not his eyes." Daniel gripped the doorway. Alexandra's voice came, warm and steady. "I think your daddy is still learning how to smile again. It takes time, Lily. But maybe he just needs a little help remembering." Later that evening, after Lily had fallen asleep mid-sentence with a star chart clutched in her hand, Daniel walked Alexandra to the door. The air between them was softer than it had been in days. "She asked you to fix me?" he said, his voice wry, but touched with something real. Alexandra smiled faintly. "Not fix, just help." He looked at her, really looked. And this time he didn't feel small, he just felt seen. "About the garage," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe we should talk." The first hammer swing echoed louder than Daniel expected. It landed clean against the rotted frame of the old storage room door, splintering the wood with a satisfying crack. He paused for a second, taking it in, the sound, the motion, the beginning of something new. Around him, the garage buzzed with life in a way it hadn't in years. Alexandra hadn't just offered help. She'd brought a plan, and she hadn't brought it alone. Word had spread fast through Maple Ridge, as it always did. One day, Daniel's garage was the same sagging building folks drove past without a second glance. The next, it was a construction site filled with the sound of drills, hammers, laughter, and hope. She'd hired local. Every roofer, carpenter, electrician, men and women Daniel had gone to school with, fixed cars for, traded favors with. She didn't swoop in with a big corporate crew. She brought the town with her. And they showed up. Lenny from the lumberyard supplied the new beams at a discount. Maria, whose husband Daniel had once fixed a busted alternator for free, painted the new signs. Even the high school shop teacher brought in students after class, letting them help under supervision, real experience, real work. Daniel moved through it all with sleeves rolled and heart steady. He didn't hide behind pride this time. He worked alongside them. Every nail he drove felt like letting go of something he didn't need anymore. Every tile laid was a new brick in the foundation of not just a business, but a future. The garage kept its bones, same footprint, same layout, but it was brighter now. Clean steel lifts, new tools, a waiting area with real chairs instead of mismatched plastic stools. But the old coffee machine still sat in the corner, humming like always, and people started coming by. Not just for repairs, but to watch, to talk, to be part of something that felt somehow like theirs, too. Daniel stood beside Alexandra one evening as the sun dipped low, casting long golden beams through the wide-open bay doors. Workers packed up for the day. Lily ran through the lot with Gerald in one hand and a popsicle in the other. He looked at Alexandra. "You didn't just help me rebuild a garage." She smiled, brushing dust off her coat. "No," she said. "We rebuilt a place where people remember they're not alone." And for the first time in years, Daniel believed it. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Maple Ridge was a town where everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. So when Daniel Reed's long, struggling garage suddenly became the talk of Main Street, renovated, buzzing, alive, the questions began pouring in faster than fresh oil through a funnel, and they all pointed in one direction: the woman. "Who is she really?" murmured the waitress at the diner. "Friend of the family?" asked a customer at the parts store. "I heard she's some kind of tech mogul, secret investor type." "No one helps like that unless they want something." The comments weren't mean, not exactly, but they scraped at something inside Daniel that hadn't fully healed. He'd spent years scraping by, building a life with his hands, his name, and the kind of stubborn grit people in this town respected. Now they looked at him like he was part of a mystery, one he didn't fully understand himself. At the grocery store, he felt eyes linger a little too long. At church, the small talk carried an edge of curiosity that didn't feel like kindness. Even old friends came by the garage, eyes flicking between the new lifts and Alexandra's car parked out back, smiles tight around the edges. "She's got deep pockets," one of them said, not unkindly. "Guess we all need a guardian angel these days." Daniel nodded and said nothing, but the words stayed with him long after the man drove off. That night, while Lily slept upstairs with Gerald tucked under her chin, Daniel stood in the kitchen, staring out the window into the quiet yard. The Mustang gleamed faintly in the dark. Beyond it, the newly lit garage sign cast a soft glow against the gravel. He didn't doubt Alexandra's heart, not anymore. But he doubted his own footing in a world where someone like her could upend everything with a phone call and a checkbook. He wasn't used to being the man with help. He was used to being the help. When Alexandra knocked on the door, holding 2 mugs of tea and that steady, unreadable look in her eyes, he let her in without a word. "You heard the talk," she said simply. "Small town," he replied. She handed him a mug. Let them talk. But Daniel wasn't sure if he could, not yet. And that was the part that scared him. The evening had started quietly. Warm air, soft music drifting from the radio in the garage, Lily painting stars on the driveway with sidewalk chalk while Daniel tightened the bolts on an old Chevy. Alexandra had brought dinner again, her usual calm presence folding into their evening like it belonged. But something had shifted. Daniel noticed it in her smile. Smaller, more careful. In the way her phone buzzed twice and she stepped outside to take the call, voice hushed. She didn't usually take calls here. Not around him, not around Lily. He hadn't meant to follow, but when he stepped outside to grab a part from the storage shed, he caught the tail end of her conversation, her back to him, unaware he was within earshot. "Yes, I know it's not a business investment. I'm doing this because they need it, because he needs it." Silence, then her voice again, softer but sharp with emotion. "No, it's not charity. He wouldn't accept that. But he's a good man, and someone has to step in when the world won't." Daniel froze. She hung up a second later, and when she turned around he was already there. Expression unreadable, shoulders squared with something heavier than anger. "How long have you been deciding what I need?" he asked, voice quiet, but pointed. Alexandra blinked. "Daniel, I didn't know you were—" "Listening? Yeah, neither did I." She opened her mouth, then closed it, the weight of the moment settling hard between them. "You think this is about generosity?" he said, heat creeping into his voice. "About saving someone? You think I'm just another project for you to fix?" "No," she said quickly. "That's not what I meant. But it's what you said." Her expression cracked. "I was trying to help." "I didn't ask for a lifeline," Daniel snapped. "You talk about needing someone like me, but now I'm just some feel-good cause that makes you feel less guilty about the world you live in." "That's not fair," she whispered. "Neither is any of this." He turned away before he said something worse. Alexandra stood there for a moment, breath caught in her throat, then quietly walked to her car and drove away. Lily's chalk stars faded in the twilight as Daniel stood alone in the driveway, the silence pressing in heavier than any storm. It arrived in a folded piece of pink construction paper slipped into a manila envelope addressed in careful, wobbly handwriting, to Miss Alex, from Lily Reed. Daniel found it on the kitchen table 2 days after Alexandra stopped coming by. Lily had been quiet that morning, unusually focused, her crayon spread across the table, tongue peeking out of the corner of her mouth the way it always did when she was deep in thought. He hadn't asked what she was working on, just gave her space. Now, as he unfolded the paper, the crayon still scattered like confetti around it, he felt his heart hitch. At the top of the page was a drawing, a stick-figure girl with brown hair standing between two taller figures, one with messy black scribbles for hair and a green shirt, the other with a long braid and a soft blue dress. They stood in front of the Mustang, drawn with its usual oversized wheels and shining sun overhead. Beneath it, in Lily's careful block letters, was a message. Dear Miss Alex, thank you for helping Daddy smile again. He was very sad before. I saw it even when he tried to hide it. But then you came, and the garage got shiny, and he laughed more. I think maybe you're magic. Please don't go away. We like you here. Love, Lily. Daniel sat down slowly in the chair beside the table, the letter trembling in his hands. She saw it all, the sadness, the change. The way Alexandra had filled the silent spaces, neither of them had known how to fix. He hadn't told her about what happened, hadn't wanted to. But children are sharper than we give them credit for. Lily hadn't needed to hear the fight. She'd felt the loss. And now, in her small, innocent way, she was trying to patch something neither of them fully understood. Daniel stared at the letter for a long time. His chest ached, not from anger anymore, but from the realization of what he'd done. He'd pushed away someone who hadn't pitied him at all. She'd believed in him, not because he was broken, but because somehow she saw something worth rebuilding. And now it was his turn to try. The sound of the city wrapped around Daniel like static. Honking cars, distant sirens, and the rhythmic hum of tires on pavement. He stood on the sidewalk outside a sleek high-rise in Chicago, shoulders tense, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. The sky was steel gray above him, the wind sharp as it whipped through the buildings. He glanced down at the covered object resting in the bed of his truck. The tarp was tied tight, but he could see the shape beneath it. Smooth lines, clean chrome, carefully restored curves. It had taken him 2 weeks, working after hours, digging through old manuals, calling in every favor from every parts dealer he knew. He hadn't been sure it would even run, but he'd done it. A piece of her past rebuilt. He walked through the lobby with nothing but her name and a quiet determination. The receptionist raised an eyebrow when he said he didn't have an appointment, but a few words and a glance toward the truck outside was all it took. The woman made a call, then another. 10 minutes later, Alexandra stepped off the elevator into the marble-floored lobby. She paused when she saw him, expression unreadable. Daniel didn't speak, not at first. He simply held out the small, polished gearshift knob, restored, engraved, the initials CV, shining like they'd never been tarnished. Her father's. Alexandra stared at it, something flickering in her eyes. Where did you get this? You told me he had a convertible, Daniel said, voice quiet. Said it only lasted 3 months. She nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the gearshift. Well, he added, managing a small smile, it's ready to go another 30 years now. Figured it was time someone gave something back to you for once. She took the knob with careful hands as if it might shatter. Her fingers closed around it, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. I'm sorry, Daniel said finally, not for needing you, for not knowing how to say I did. Alexandra looked up, and the guarded edges of her face softened. You didn't have to say it. He nodded, breath catching. I think I do now. Outside, beneath the gray sky, her father's old car waited, reborn, just like them. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that wrapped around you like a blanket, soft, warm, honest. Above them, the stars stretched endlessly across the dark sky, unbothered by the world below. The garage stood behind them, humming gently with the afterglow of life, fresh paint, laughter echoing from earlier in the day, and the faint scent of motor oil clinging to the air like memory. Daniel and Alexandra stood side by side, hands intertwined, fingers laced in a silence that needed no words. The Mustang sat nearby, its hood still warm from an evening drive. Beside it, her father's old convertible gleamed under the starlight, newly restored and full of stories waiting to be written. Lily was asleep upstairs, curled around Gerald, unaware that two people, who once stood on opposite ends of the world, were now standing on the same small patch of gravel, and choosing each other. Daniel glanced at Alexandra, her hair loose in the breeze, eyes turned upward. "You know," he said softly, "when I sold that car, it felt like the end of something." She turned to him, eyes catching the starlight. "And when I returned it, I thought maybe it could be the beginning of something else." He smiled. "I didn't know I was letting go of one kind of love to make space for another." She stepped closer. "It was never just about a car, Daniel, or a garage, or even the past. It was about what we choose to build from the pieces." He nodded, a lump rising in his throat. "I used to think I had to fix everything myself, that needing someone meant I was failing." "And now?" she asked gently. He looked at her, really looked. "Now I know love isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about standing beside it, holding it steady, making something new out of the cracks." Alexandra reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. Above them the stars burned bright, not out of charity, not out of debt, but out of something quiet, certain, and real. Love, earned, shared, chosen.